Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode, as well as free training on creativity, over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hi, it's James Taylor here. Today's episode was first aired as part of International Authors Summit. This inspiring virtual summit reveals the secrets of making, marketing, and monetizing a best-selling book. If you would like to access the full video version as well as in-depth sessions with over 40 best-selling authors, then I've got a very special offer for you. Just go to internationalauthorssummit.com where you'll be able to register for a free pass for the summit. Yeah, that's right. Over 40 New York Times and Amazon best-selling authors, book editors, agents, and publishers sharing their insights, strategies, and tactics on how to write and market your first or next bestseller. So just go to internationalauthorssummit.com, but not before you listen to today's episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted to be joined by the wonderful David Allen. The work of David Allen has had a profound impact on the lives of many authors, entrepreneurs, and creatives, including myself. David Allen is founder of the David Allen Company and author of Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. If you're new to Getting Things Done, or GTD as it's often called, it is a self-management methodology that became a worldwide phenomenon and has helped countless individuals and organizations bring order to chaos. Indeed, Time magazine called Getting Things Done the defining self-help business book of its time. And the insights contained within it have enabled many to alleviate feelings of overwhelm and bring greater focus, clarity, and creativity to their life and work. It's my great pleasure to have David join us today. So welcome, David.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So share with them what's going on in your world just now. What are you working on?
We just launched a new book, Getting Things Done for teenagers, staying focused in a distracting world. And I'm doing all kinds of interviews and podcasts and things about that. So just helping get that launched. We're also in the process of working on a Getting Things Done workbook book. Kind of in the genre of, a lot of the 7 Habits workbook and things like that. So really more focused on, okay, people want to really dig in and here's a real practical how-tos about how to get started applying the methodology. So those are 2 big projects going on. We're also consistently refining our global training curriculum. My wife is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on that, just graphics and support materials and trademarks and all kinds of things like that. So a lot of stuff going on.
So when you started on the journey to writing Getting Things Done, could you have ever imagined that it would you'd be one day sitting in front of a mountain of translations of your books and writing now for teens and writing for these other groups?
I've sort of learned a healthy attitude a long time ago about stuff like that. Have high anticipation but no expectation. So I had a vision like, wouldn't that be cool if this hit a nerve out there? But I had no idea, and I was ready, kind of girded my loins to say, hey, it's a noisy world. I'm not sure anybody's going to really kind of catch what this is. And I had a lot of very healthily skeptical people say, gee, David, I don't know if we can put you in a book. I knew I could translate this methodology with, I've just spent thousands of hours with some of the best and brightest on the planet, implementing this stuff with them one-on-one, and certainly having hundreds of thousands of people in seminars. So I know that if I had captive audiences, that I could capture them. I wasn't sure that I could put that in a book or that people could catch it in a book. So I really didn't know. I mean, to me, it was a big question mark as to whether I was able to virtualize essentially this methodology and get it in a book. So
talk us through that process then. You mentioned when you initially kind of went out to the world, with this German, this idea about writing a book about the work that you'd been doing with clients. How long was that process from you thinking, okay, I am going to make this, I want to have a book coming out, to the process of actually being in the stores and people being able to read it?
Well, it was on my sort of someday maybe list for, probably several years. I really pulled the trigger to make it happen from the time I decided, okay, go on that and start to and make it an active, make the project active. 4 years, pretty much. I started in '97, really, and I got on the bookshelves at the beginning of 2001.
And that process, with the difference between like fiction and non-fiction, with fiction often they'll have to have the whole book written. Did you work on, was it creating a book proposal first and then going and speaking with agents? So what was that process like?
Yeah, I was scratching my head. I had no idea, so I figured, well, I guess I better study how do you write and sell a book. What do you do? At the time, sorry, I don't remember what the books were, but I think at the time there were 3 or 4 books on the market about how to write a book proposal or how to then write it and sell a book. So I certainly studied all of those, and basically had to, create my own version of some sort of a business plan. Like who's it for? What's unique about it? Why would somebody buy this? Because obviously, if you're trying to get somebody to buy it, to sell it, they're going to have to trust that they can sell it. And that was an agonizing but a very fruitful process to go through, is write a business plan for your own book. So I did that. I also wasn't sure whether I go right to an editor or publishers, because I knew a couple, and or get an agent. And I made the mistake of actually sort of contacting a couple of people who were editors or in the publishing business directly themselves. Mistake, because I didn't know really how to frame it for them, And so I had a very good friend who was he was head of adult books for Houghton Mifflin in Boston, and he was a client and a friend. And he said, David, if you don't have a name as an author, and your book might have potential, sort of universal appeal or national appeal. He didn't say international, but if it wasn't like a niche, like the retirement of green Eskimos, and I don't know, if you got a really niche, topic, you probably need to find the niche publisher that will do that, and you'd probably go direct to them. So that's what you would do. But if it has more universal appeal, then he said, get an agent, because they're going to know how to frame this and help you frame it appropriately, and make the deal. And he said, by the way, I know a good one, and happened to be his next door neighbor, and she was great. And she still is my agent, 18 years later. So Doe is great. And she, worth every penny, that she gets for her 15%, believe me. She had been an ex-editor in New York anyway, so she knew the world. She knew that world, and she knew people, and she was able to do that. But funny, when I gave her my book proposal, because I wrote a sample chapter or two, whatever. She said, "Well, who wrote this?" I said, "Well, what do you mean who wrote this?" She said, "Well, most people in writing business books don't write them. They're ghostwritten." So she was quite surprised that I actually had. That I'd written it. I'm scratching my head, Carl. I thought you're supposed to write your own book, so as naive as I was. So anyway, so she shopped it. We only got one deal, but it turned out to be a great deal, for the book.
And how different was the book that eventually hit the shelves compared to that initial proposal? Was it like pretty much there? It was just kind of tweaked around the edges, or was there really a big difference in the final product?
No, yes and no. There's kind of a both answers to that, because, well, the methodology I knew, and I knew it backwards and forwards because I've been doing it for 35 years or 30 years by that point, and so I knew what it is that I wanted to communicate. What I didn't know was how to put it in a book form. So it took a while. It took the first year to just sort of get the deal and sort of craft the thing and set it up. And it took the second year to write the first draft, and the first draft didn't work. Because I wrote the first draft like I delivered a seminar, in a pretty linear format. Doesn't work. And I went, oh God, this just isn't quite the way it really ought to be. And I had sort of the dark night of the soul. Oh my God, I spent all this time and this is not as good as it really ought to be, because this is a bit of my life work, or at least my professional life work, that I'd put into this book. And so I literally just threw it away and wrote another draft.
So was there ever a point in that process where you just actually said to yourself, I don't think I can do that. I'm going to have to give the, if there was an advance, give the advance back, and just, you knew that you were very obviously good in training and working with clients and consulting and speaking. But was there ever a point you said, listen, maybe this isn't for me?
I don't know. There was certainly a point where I thought, I don't know if I can do this. I don't think I ever thought I would give up. But I guess one of the problems is that one of the first thing, actually maybe the first thing I wrote before, when I sat down to start to craft this whole idea, was I wrote the reviews. And because I'm a firm believer in sort of affirmational thinking and visioning thinking, and knowing that if you set something up like that internally, you're going to perform and perceive things differently. Yeah. And that's the problem, is that those reviews, it's not that, and I even wrote who wrote the reviews, but not that they did, and they weren't exactly the reviews that showed up. But what that did was it raised the bar inside of me about the quality of the book. And that's why the first draft didn't work, because I wrote it, again, like I do a seminar, and that's not the way people really need to read a book. And there were three things that I really wanted to address, or that I wanted to deal with, that about this methodology. First of all, I wanted people to just understand kind of what the methodology was itself. And then if people were interested in implementing it, I wanted to give them the how-to, kind of the specifics about how you actually go about this. And the third and probably most important thing was I wanted to communicate and oh, by the way, the cool stuff that really happens when people actually implement this seemingly simple methodology, how transformative it can be, both for individuals and for organizations. And, I could get all that out if I had people for a 2-day seminar. I could kind of, I could weave it all that stuff through, but couldn't do it in a book in just a linear format. In other words, had the first draft, people would read it and they went, "Oh my God, David, you nailed me in the first paragraph," but it took 4 chapters for me to find out how to do it. And so I said, well, that doesn't work. So again, it's kind of the dark night of the soul. My big epiphany was, okay, David, write it in 3 parts. So the first part was a quick overview of the methodology. The second part was, by the way, if you want to implement this, here's the how-tos. Third part was the oh, by the ways. And that really worked, but it took another year to do it. So, so I just threw away the first draft and just wrote in a whole other draft, took another year to do that. And, worked, I had, very cooperative editor and publisher. This was Penguin Viking. Janet Goldstein at the time was my editor. She was fabulous, a great coach, fabulous on this. Very light touch with me, but just some of the great little tweaks about how to reach people through a book. Because people in a book, you kind of have to, it's sort of armchair stuff. Somebody sitting in an armchair, how do you reach them in a way that they're not sitting in a seminar? They haven't hired you as a coach to sit with them at their desk. It's a very different game.
You're kind of moving from that kind of, I know you do a lot of speaking, keynote speaking. You're moving kind of from that sage on the stage to the guide on the side, and kind of walking them through that. One of the things that I love about the book is, you mentioned actually the 7 Habits, the great Stephen Covey book. And one thing I think your book shares with that is, it's a perennial, it's a classic, and this is, I guess, I'm wondering how you kind of resolve this, because I'm wondering at certain points you might have had some people kind of pushing you, saying things like, okay, what tool, what gadget, what widget should I buy in order to do this? And it felt like you very much you left those things out of the book. There was obviously a community that kind of built around that, but was that quite a definite decision that you made, thinking about how can this book last for a long time? I think that's something a lot of writers kind of struggle with, especially in the kind of writing in the kind of business area.
2 or 3 ways to answer that. First of all, we did want to try to make it as evergreen as possible, so that it wasn't outdated. So we went through the book, the first draft of the book anyway, several times, to try to pull out all the business buzzwords and anything that was particularly time-based. If so, to your point about the technology, I did mention in the first edition. Now, I wrote the new edition for 2015, getting things done. And one of the things I did was take out a lot of the references in the new edition to technology. I actually talked about in the first edition Lotus Notes and Microsoft and Palm Pilots and so forth. And, you're probably not old enough to remember a Palm Pilot, you know, and so that ultimately was going to date it. Not only that, once GTD kind of hit as a meme out there in the tech world, at last count there were over 300 apps that had been built around it now, and they're coming out every week because people read the book or they get the idea of GTD. And they say, well, all I need are lists, and so they're all just list managers, but they're changing so rapidly. People say, what's the best tool? I say, whatever tool you'll use. And it's because it's actually tool agnostic. You do need a tool because it's a lot about building the external brain and having holders for reminders, of your commitments, in multiple forms. So you do need some sort of external, form and format. But any of them will do. Any kind of a list manager, whether that's low tech, just file folders with data in them, or mid tech, where you're just using a loose leaf planner, pages in a loose leaf planner. Or now high tech, you can use any of the high tech apps that make lists, you can do. And so I didn't want to get people too wrapped around the tool, because people then get focused on the tool, not the methodology. If you don't get the methodology, no tool will work.
Yeah.
If you get the methodology, you can make any tool work.
But what I find fascinating is there was very much. I was speaking to Eric Ries recently about the Lean Startup, and he said, how quickly a community started to kind of build up, not necessarily by him putting out there, but I sense with looking at, like, if I look for GTD today, there's all these threads on these forums everywhere about how people are using it, and they're talking about how they're applying the methodology. And I think that's great, because that in ways you've got the core of the thing there, but you've got these communities, new people are kind of coming to all the time, new people with their, I've seen a new way that I could apply this, with artificial intelligence, nowadays. So you've got all those things starting to come into it as well.
Yeah, it's true. But again, most people who don't quite get the methodology, it's a lot more subtle than the simplicity the model may indicate. And if you don't really get it and you keep falling off the wagon, you think the new is going to help you get back on. And so where's the new cool thing that'll really make me get it to work? Wrong answer.
Yeah.
That's not that's the new thing. Yeah, there is to some degree a cool tool helps. Because it'll give you more motivation to do it. I know when I first got a Palm Pilot, way back in the mid 90s, I thought, wow, that was really cool, just because it looked so cool in a dark bar. Just great to have, and to learn the graffiti. It was really fun, fit in your pocket. The form factor was great, and it was kind of a new thing to have something that essentially that simple, but that was that functional, as a digital tool. And so just having a cool tool can really help. But any tool will work as long as you're working. And then
as you start to kind of pivot to then marketing, getting out there, marketing and kind of selling the book. Obviously, you have an interesting model, because you, a little bit like with the Covey thing as well. You have a whole training business behind that book as well. So I'm wondering, when you first kind of went out to the book, what did that marketing plan kind of look like? Who were the people that you knew you wanted to be the early adopters to it, and then how has that evolved over the years? Because GTD because it is a perennial. I'm guessing you're continually doing interviews like this. You're doing things all the time where you're talking about it. So I'm wondering, what does a marketing plan look like for a classic?
Well, I can't say that I had a marketing plan. And it's kind of follow my nose and see who wants it and go there. So and even back then, the publishing world was pretty much deer in the headlights about how to do this, and not a whole lot of money was thrown after. They only threw money after good money. If the book worked, but to try to get it to work, the Penguin wound up creating radio tour interviews and things like that. Not a lot, and they set up a few book signings and so forth in some of the bigger markets and bigger bookstores. But there really wasn't much of a plan. My plan has basically been, pretty much take advantage of any invitation I get to talk about it. So I haven't, I think I actually added up. I've averaged one podcast and interview a week for 17 years.
Wow.
So, and they still keep coming. It's still, talking to you right now. So they're still, and of course with the new book for teens that just came out, Getting Things Done for Teens, that's, so I'm on lots of interviews about that. But I just take advantage of all of those. My mission is basically to get this to as many people on the planet as might want it. So why turn any of that down? There are a couple I turned down because there's a little sleaze factor that seems obvious if you go, if they're either trying to make a whole lot of money off of it, trying to build off my brand, and those kind of, I sort of filter a couple of those out, but I probably turned down 5 in this 15 years.
Do you remember a point in the launch of the book, when the book was kind of getting out there, people started to talk about, a kind of seminal point when you felt this is really getting traction now? This is really moving.
No, I don't think there was any one. Point. They, in the U.S. anyway, they consider it a bestseller if you sell 60,000 books in a year, in the first year, in the nonfiction world, and it hit that mark. So that was pretty much an indicator. I mean, the fact that Penguin or Viking kept it in hardback for a second year, which your first hurdle is to get them to decide they want to go to paperback, and the second one is. The second thing is, if it's even better than that, is they'll keep it in hardback because they make more money off the hardback sales. As soon as it's out in paper, those things diminish, tremendously. So those were indicators that, at least in terms of the publishing world, they thought this was doing pretty well. And I had been, invited. There'd been a couple of, fairly interesting business articles written about me. And this methodology. We didn't call it Getting Things Done back then, because we didn't call it Getting Things Done until the book was out, because that was the title of the book. So there was some press that I already had. My name had some brand anyway. Fast Company had done a couple of different articles about my stuff. Stuart Alsop, who was writing for Forbes at the time, took a seminar of mine, and so his next column, he sort of wrote how cool this was that he went to this thing. And it was funny, in my seminar, one of his projects was he had to write the next column.
So you made it about that.
Somehow I made it, and he's a bit of a curmudgeon. He's a great guy. I really like Stuart a lot. But he wrote some very glowing words about me, and that because of just his leverage and his name, that kind of spread. And because I was in the Fast Company articles, Fast Company was doing conferences around the U.S. and I was speaking at several of those. So I had a little bit of traction already, even before the book came out. So once it did, and by the way, the other answer to that point was we did target this to the fast track professional. And because it's universal. I mean, even back then. I knew this worked for students, it worked for clergy, it worked for physicians, it worked for accountants, it worked for stay-at-home dads. I mean, it worked for anybody that's got a busy life that need to keep track of their stuff. But the fast-track professionals were right about then, late 90s, were getting hit with the tsunami of email, and they were the ones who also had, training budgets and coaching, and consulting budgets, behind them. Mm-hmm. And so that was just the sweet spot, really, for for inserting this. So it really looked that way. That's why the second edition that I wrote in 2015 very much expanded. People say, "Well, what's changed?" A lot of what changed was just the breadth of the market.
And that fast track professional, did you, as you were writing the book, were you very conscious of that? As Stephen King would say, like the ideal reader in your head? Or was that more kind of out there, you weren't thinking about it so much?
I wasn't thinking about it that much, but that was my experience, was with that group. So all my experience, or 95% of my experience with this methodology was with that audience.
So you knew all those, because they'd been at your seminars, you knew all those kind of follow-up questions, or all the gaps that you'd want to ensure that you were covered in the book.
Yeah, indeed.
And then you've just written this one for teens now. I'm interested, what kind of, you probably get asked this all the time about tools, but I'm interested, like in terms of the tools for writing. Are you still very much a Microsoft kind of person, or do you use some other kind of tool that you find very useful for your researching and your writing stages?
I've been a Word guy from day one. I've tried a number of things, outlining programs and so forth, and I even in the early days tried the outlining function in Word, but it was way too complicated and technical for me to work with. I found the best thing to do when I was writing something, fairly significant like a book. I found it was best to just build 2 Word documents. One of them was the outline and the other was the text. So instead of trying to use both those within the same document, I just made 2 documents. And it was much easier to then function that way, to just create a kind of a working outline, and then I could throw ideas onto that. And then on the other one, I would start writing text, because I tend to think while I'm writing text. So, I don't really pre-think a whole lot of this stuff. I just need to get started and then see how it flows and see where it goes. And then, thank God for word processors. So, you can, I still remember the days of hunting and teching and erase tape. Handwriting was much easier than that. But, that's why Word and, the word processing app, and functionality itself was a game changer.
And as you kind of travel around the world, you're speaking, you're doing book signings as well. Do you come across many authors who kind of come up to you who use GTD to allow them to kind of get more writing done as well? I mean, I use GTD. I've been for a long time, and I'm one of those people who's kind of gone from the very kind of techie kind of using certain tools for that to actually I now just use sheets and blankets again, and with all my lists, and the methodology is the same. And I'm working on one of my someday maybe projects is now moving into an actual project with lists as well. But I wonder, do you come across many authors who, especially the people that have come from that professional world, that are maybe now moving into the world of writing and speaking, that have making that transition and applying the methodology to their writing?
I can't say that I can remember anybody specifically saying they were doing that. I've certainly had thousands of people in my seminars, and I'm sure there have been people out there doing that. And anybody who gets GTD, I mean, getting things, GTD is nothing but just being highly efficient with and effective with how you think through something and actually make it actually happen, and how you execute on anything. So, yeah, I mean, the whole process of outcome and action. What am I trying to produce? What would wild success for this look like? And then you brainstorm, all the potentially relevant stuff that might be relevant to it. Then you organize all of that, and then you come up with the components, and then next actions on the moving parts. I mean, come on, duh. That's how you get out of the rooms. That's how we talk. So getting things done I didn't make that up. I just recognized what we do when things really work really well, and the most optimally efficient way to think through something. So you're not wasting mental energy. Somebody, probably accurately described GTD as lean for the brain. The idea of no waste.
Yeah.
So don't have a thought twice. Don't lose any good thinking, and then make sure that you're accessing all potentially relevant information for that. So the natural planning model that I talk about in chapter 3 of the book. How do I think through a situation? What's the purpose of it? What are the principles that I need to adhere to while I'm doing this? And what would wild success look like? That automatically creates a cognitive dissonance. If wild success is not what you currently have, then you say, well, what? So I have the why, and then I have the what, but now what's the how? And the how comes in 2 parts. How part 1 is just brainstorm. Oh my God, we need to think about that. Well, here's an idea. Well, we could do it that way too, and yada yada yada. So then you want to make sure that brainstorming process is facilitated and rich. And then how part B is, okay, now out of all of that, how do I start to create a coherent structure, out of what that is, whether that's chapters or sequence of stuff, or, however you start to structure it.
Yeah.
And then you get going. And you can actually start this process anywhere. You can just start writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw a quote the other day. I think it was Daniel Pink said he's a user. He just said he's a devout card-carrying GTD true believer, and so he's there's an example of a writer, very kind of prolific writer who kind of uses it. I don't know in terms of how he uses it in his writing, but he definitely, just in terms of being more productive as a human being, as a person, in order to be allowed to kind of get the work done that he wants to put out into the world.
Sure. I mean, a lot of what GTD is about is giving more space. It's not about time. It gives you more room. So what you do with that room is up to you. What an artist, a musician does with that room is have better song ideas and capture more of them, and produce the songs quicker and faster. Somebody else can use more space to think more strategically in terms of their work or their business. Some people, certainly writers, could use more space. Hey, I need just more room to just do nothing and kind of let the muse, show up as it does. So, but if you're distracted by 2 meetings ago, or your printer is out of ink and you forgot to order some more, and there's all kinds of just the ordinariness of life that can then eat you up, that shouldn't. But if you don't pay appropriate attention to what has your attention, it'll take more of your attention than it deserves. That's a big sort of GTD saying. So a lot of what GTD is about is handle all the open loops of your life, put them in, appropriately engage with them, so it gives you clarity of space.
Yeah, and you have that kind of central point of truth, that trusted system, in order to get all those things out of the head, to get that brain dump happening as well, which I think is a very useful process for any creative person. If people want to learn more about the GTD system, where is the best place for them to go to kind of find out more about it? You obviously mentioned the book, but a lot of our attendees just now probably got kids, they've got teens as well. Maybe you kind of want to kind of give them some of that methodology. Where's the best place for them to go to find out all about all that?
Well, gettingthingsdone.com is our sort of major website, but we now have a website for the teens and the teen book. So gtdforteens.com is that website, and the book just got launched, so you can get it from all the places you get good books. At least in the U.S. and the UK is coming really soon, and it's coming really soon in 3 or 4 other languages, pretty quick. So yeah, because there's been so much pent up demand. People. One of the reasons to write this book for teens was because 30 years ago, when I started doing this work, people go, "God, I wish I'd have learned this when I was 12."
Yeah.
All right. Or they've got kids that are 12 or 15 or 18 and go, "God, my kids need this."
Yeah.
As well as me. And I go, "Yeah." I just didn't know how to reach them because I don't have kids, but I co-wrote it with Mike Williams and Mark Wallace. Both of them have kids, and Mike's got teens himself and has raised them using this methodology. And Mark's a public school teacher in the Minneapolis school system. And once he got GTD, he said, "God, I can't keep this back from my kids." And so he's teaching, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, this stuff very successfully. So they did really the heavy lifting of how do we frame this methodology for that next kind of generation. It's still the same methodology, and the book for teens doesn't step it down at all. I mean, a chief executive has to empty their briefcase when they come back from the board meeting and then decide what to do with all that. A 12-year-old has to empty their pack when they come home from school, and not let something crawl through in a hole in there that their mom needed to sign 3 weeks ago.
I love that as well. The fact that, it reminds me a little bit of something like Edward de Bono, where there was these different levels that he obviously spoke and he wrote for corporates. Many big companies, Shell, BP, would bring him in to work with their top executives, but actually, perhaps the biggest legacy that he will leave is in terms of in kids learning his stuff, and education systems, an entire country like Singapore, for example. I think they've really built a lot of their education system around his methodology when it comes to creativity. So I'm really interested to see how this goes next. This next step of your journey, maybe you're going to have entire countries using GTD methodology. I think that would be a very cool thing to do.
That's the mission. Well, our mission is that we have a world where there are no problems, only projects.
I love that.
And kids get that faster than us, probably. So,
well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you again. Thank you so much for coming on this and sharing your insights in terms of your writing process and publishing and getting your ideas out into the world. It's been a great pleasure talking with you today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.